I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology.
Wait a second. Did he just say that we lost the technology to go to the moon? And what about all these other claims of NASA losing stuff? Let's look into all these claims. The clip with Don Pettit was taken from an International Business Times interview in 2016. The interview took place at the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Virginia. Don claims that all the technology has been destroyed. But if we take a walk around the corner in this very museum, we could find the command module used by Apollo 11, along with Neil Armstrong's spacesuit. But who cares about individual pieces like that? Approximately 740 miles southwest of where the interview took place is the Apollo Saturn V Center in Florida. There, visitors can see a whole Saturn V, all the rocket stages with an unused lunar module and a flown capsule along with Alan Shepard's spacesuit, worn during Apollo 14. But anyone familiar with how the Apollo missions worked, especially regarding the rockets and the landers, might know that after they are used, they are discarded, either to burn up in Earth's atmosphere or to be left on the surface of the moon. So, what are these? These are genuine hardware items that went unused. Manufacturers of the Apollo program produced parts well ahead of their missions to keep pace with demand. But as funding for Apollo dwindled, some parts and even whole machines were left unused, while others, namely the capsules, are from actual flown Apollo missions. So, we have hardware left over, but do we have the documentation? Yes we do. So what technology is quote-unquote missing? Well, technology is an extremely vague term, so we'll need to consider all possible options that the term could apply to, considering things like the manufacturing process of Apollo hardware, the facilities and equipment used to integrate the stages, the components used in the computers, and even the computers on the ground that supported the mission. This is a short list of the things we'll have to look through. The largest part of our mission to the moon started with the Saturn V's first stage, consisting of two large aluminum fuel tanks. Each cylindrical fuel tank had two domed caps at each end. One tank carried RP-1, aka kerosene and also known as jet fuel, while the other tank carried cryogenic liquid oxygen. To make these domed caps, also known as bulkheads, NASA had contractors North American Aviation and Boeing cut metal sheets into sections of the hemispherical dome, each section of the circle being called a gore. These gores are then literally exploded into shape, as detailed here in this footage from the era.
The partially finished gores are then taken to North American's El Toro facility, where they are clamped in mirror-finished female dies. Then they are placed in a tank of water and further formed by the explosion of an exactly placed charge of primacord. This forming procedure is repeated 3 times, and the gore is annealed after the first 2 explosions.
Today, none of that is used in the manufacturing of rocket stages. Looking at NASA's newest rocket, the Space Launch System, or SLS, we can compare its production to what NASA used during Apollo. SLS is similarly shaped, consisting of 2 aluminum fuel tanks with domed ends. When it comes time for welding, NASA now uses a new process, known as friction stir welding, which was patented in 1991. Without getting too deep, friction stir welding uses a spinning head that generates frictional heat, softening and fusing the 2 metal sections into one structure.
In the past, I've used fusion welding, which introduces a lot of heat and a lot of stress into the part itself. And with friction stir welding, we can maximize that joint's strength by basically joining the 2 metals without introducing all the heat. So it's a way of basically just stirring the 2 metals together. On the circumferential welds, we use a self-reacting process where we basically take and we pinch the joint between 2 shoulders and stir the metals in between those 2 pieces of metal. On the vertical welds, we use a conventional method, where we basically push up against an anvil, a big, large piece of metal, and just stir from one side the metals together.
The explosive forming and TIG welding of fuel tank sections have become obsolete and are no longer used in spaceflight, meaning all the facilities and equipment to explosively form fuel tanks have been abandoned and scrapped ever since the end of Apollo, as newer, more cost-effective means of manufacturing have come about to replace them. From my research, SpaceX was the last to use explosive hydroforming in spaceflight. According to Elon Musk, in 2019, SpaceX used explosive hydroforming to create the Raptor rocket engine's nozzle jacket. Granted, with the many evolutions of the Raptor rocket engine since 2019, it's unclear if they continue to use explosive hydroforming, as it's typically best for low production rate components. But at over 500 Raptor rocket engines being made, it's no longer a low production rate component. But there was more to Apollo than just the rocket. Another critical component was the computer that got us to the moon and back. Known as the Apollo Guidance Computer, or AGC, it was vital in our missions to the moon. At the time in the 1960s, it was the absolute bleeding edge in computing. But as it's famously touted now, our phones and even our fridges have more computing power than not just the AGC, but all of NASA at the time of Apollo 11. But what exactly made the AGC work, and how did we get what normally took a whole building to fit into the Apollo capsule? The answer is literally hand-woven computer memory.
Now, after the component holder has been completely loaded with cores, we're then ready to do the wiring. In order to perform the wiring operation, we store about 20 feet of wire in this needle. See how that wire comes out of there? Now, the operator will take a core holder and pass the needle through the core, around to the other side, and then weave it back through to different positions. Now, let's watch how the girls do this operation in a little more detail. Now, here we have a pair of girls who are wiring the address wiring of the core rope module. Now, they pass the wire back and forth, stored in the needle, and put it through the cores in a particular wiring pattern. Now, each time a wire goes through, they must very carefully wrap the wire around one of those little nylon pins. As you can see, what that does is pull the wire away from the center of the core to allow room to pass the needle through again.
I see. Now, these address wires go to every single core?
That's right. Now, when the wire is completely weaved into the rope, it must be terminated on a little solder terminal. Now, the girl strips the insulation from the wire and very carefully wraps it around the pin. Then they use a magnifying glass to inspect their work. Now, the sense wiring information, or the wiring that contains the program of the fixed memory, is performed by using this machine. The machine indexes to a particular location of a core, and then the girl passes the needle through the aperture and provides the wire to go through the right core.
She doesn't have to think about which core it goes through next.
No, the machine does that for her. Now note, each time the wire passes through, that little aperture jogs down and pulls the wire around one of the nylon pins. When she passes the needle through, she will trip the switch with the needle, which causes a tape reader to advance. There's the tape reader, and that in turn causes the core plane to move its position. Now, after all the wiring is completed, these nylon pins that we use to temporarily hold the wire can now be removed. Next, we must press the wires very gently down into place so we'll be able to fold up the whole assembly. Now, this operator is folding the core planes into a sandwich-type construction and laying them into the header of the module.
The AGC used rope core memory, or copper wire wrapped around magnetic cores, to store and hold the many programs and instructions the vehicle relied on. Now, there are many videos detailing just how advanced and capable our modern phones have become compared to the AGC. For example, the channel Curious Droid covered this topic, though a bit outdated. He breaks down how the AGC compared to at the time, new iPhone 6 to the AGC. He explains how the iPhone 6 has 488,000 times more RAM than the AGC, and 3.5 million times more ROM than the AGC, but I'll link his video down below. So instead, I'll compare the AGC to something more contemporary to its time, and something many Americans had in their homes, namely the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. I'd use something closer in performance to the AJC, like the Atari 2600, but I don't have an Atari 2600, so we're comparing the AJC to what I do have, an NES. Also note, all metrics I'm about to list regarding the NES are specific to the NTSC or North American NES, not the Japanese Famicom or the European PAL version. The AJC had a clock speed of 1.024 MHz. In the NES's Ryko 2A03 CPU chip has a clock speed of 1.79 MHz, roughly 75% faster than the AJC, allowing the NES's CPU to perform 500,000 instructions a second compared to the AJC's 85,000 instructions a second. However, where performance starts to fall off is in memory. The NES, with a cartridge, only has 40 kilobytes of read-only memory, or ROM, while the AJC has 69.12 kilobytes of ROM. The AJC even has nearly as much RAM, or random access memory, as the NES, with the AJC having 3.75 kilobytes of RAM, and the NES having 4 kilobytes of onboard RAM between this video RAM chip over here and this work RAM chip over here. And for comparison, this script, when I converted it to a text file and compressed that text file, was still 9 kilobytes. So, would you want to use an NES or even your smartphone to reach the moon instead? Likely not. The NES and even your phone can experience fatal errors and crashes that could result in the device either being bricked or losing whatever data it had. The AGC, meanwhile, was built crash-proof, capable of restarting itself if a fault was discovered and resuming where it left off, as well as a detailed program management list that allowed it to decide what programs or activities to prioritize and what to dump. So, what changed in 16 years to make the AGC obsolete and beaten out by a household video game console in almost every respect? The microchip, enabling smaller, more capable processors than ever before. And as a result, all the skilled seamstresses who made the AGC and its complicated wiring lost their skills to time, while all the tools and equipment to make all that hand-woven computer memory was also scrapped. Anything the AGC could have done, a simple microchip could have done for a fraction of the size, a fraction of the cost, and a fraction of the weight. But even if we ripped out all the spare and leftover hardware that's sitting in museums and then sent them down to Florida for launch, there's other lost bits of hardware that still make it impossible. The Launch Umbilical Tower, or LUT, was the large structure that always sat beside the Saturn V before and during launch. In fact, when controllers in the Launch Control Center said, "The tower," this 380-foot tower provided fuel, power, and access to the rocket up to the last few minutes before launch. However, after being retired at the end of the Apollo program in the 1970s, NASA modified 2 of them to permanently stay at Launchpad 39A and the nearby Launchpad 39B, becoming the fixed service structures. In the 2000s, a fundraiser was raised to turn the abandoned tower parts into a monument to preserve its place in history. Estimates put the necessary funds needed to relocate the massive structure at around $40 million. Sadly, as no donor could be found to cover these costs, and NASA's growing concerns over the environmentally hazardous lead paint flaking off, the rusting, disintegrating tower was broken down for scrap in 2004. Leaving only the modified towers operating at Launchpads 39A and 39B, with SpaceX tearing down the fixed service structure at 39A to make way for pad infrastructure to support their Falcon 9 and later Falcon Heavy rockets. leaving the only remains of the last tower at 39B, which NASA also began demolishing in 2011 to make way for their new moon rocket, the Space Launch System, or SLS. However, some parts have been saved, be it for future use or having been preserved in museums. The crawlers that carried the massive rockets to their launch pads still remain, as Crawler Transport 2 is responsible for rolling SLS to its launch pad. Crawler Transporter 1 is currently awaiting a future application after several contracts to use the vehicle were abandoned, but the vehicle still exists and could be used once a use case is found. The crew access arm, used by the Apollo crews to enter the Apollo spacecraft, was also preserved and can be seen at the Kennedy Space Center's gift shop, acting as a bridge visitors can walk across. An example of a more recent Apollo-era loss that we've seen is the demolition of the Saturn 1B rocket on display at the Ardmore Welcome Center in northern Alabama. The vehicle stood at 142 feet tall. It was made of both flight and training hardware. The first stage was flight hardware that went unused after the end of the Apollo program, while the S-4B upper stage was designed for underwater training for Skylab missions, to which Skylab itself was built from a spare S-4B stage and converted into America's first space station. But all that is just a very, very short list of all the hardware that has been preserved or still remains in existence from the Apollo program. Something people often overlook is that the 60s and 70s were a period of immense technological development and putting all those advancements into action. Many of these technologies, like the moon landing, were also abandoned, to be either shelved in museums or scrapped out of existence. Things like massive hovercraft airships like the SRN-4, which in its third and final iteration, named the Princess Anne, was capable of hauling up to 60 cars and 418 people while zipping along the water at up to 80.5 miles per hour. For context, a 747-400 holds nearly the same number of people in its typical seating configuration. Or the famous SR-71, which still officially holds many speed records for manned jet-powered aircraft, but has not seen flight since 1999. It stands alone in its immense performance capabilities, unmatched by any other crewed jet aircraft. An even closer example to Apollo's lost technology is Concorde, a supersonic airliner that carried passengers across the world at unprecedented speeds. But after it was retired, it has never since been matched by any modern alternative. Today, if you want to fly faster than the speed of sound, you need to buy a military jet, as some billionaires have, or ride a rocket, all of which cost substantially more than even the most expensive Concorde ticket. However, something most people, and likely Don himself, overlooked is that there exists a spacecraft that was designed to carry humans to the moon and back that has never stopped flying. That being Soyuz, the Soviets' answer to the Apollo spacecraft.
Wait a second, Big Mike. I'm a space fan. What could you mean by Soyuz? It's only flown in Earth orbit, right?
Well, let me explain from the beginning. Soyuz saw its first crewed flight in April 1967 during the ill-fated Soyuz 1. In fact, Soyuz launched its first crew before NASA sent any crew into space aboard Apollo, though that fact is only true due to the tragic fire that consumed the lives of the Apollo 1 crew. If the fire hadn't happened, Apollo would have been first, with a planned launch date of February in 1967. The Soyuz spacecraft began its testing in Earth orbit, with work well underway to get Soyuz ready for crewed lunar flight. The variant that would support crewed lunar flights was called Soyuz 7K LOK, LOK meaning Lunar Orbiting Craft. This variant was slightly heavier and came with fuel cells instead of solar panels. But before launching this large crewed variant of Soyuz to the moon, the Soviet space program first sent a smaller, simpler version of the Soyuz on a flight around the moon and back to Earth. This version, known as Zond, consisted of a descent and service module. It had one successful test mission, followed by 3 consecutive failures. In March of 1968, the Soviets managed to send Zond around the moon and back. Several months later, the Soviets launched another Zond mission, circling the moon again, but this time with tortoises, fruit fly eggs, and several plants. But the Zond program didn't end there, as the Soviets planned for a crewed launch of Zond in July of 1969. However, with Apollo 11 set to occur the same month, and the Proton rocket to launch Zond still being unreliable, the Zond program was cancelled, with the Soviets going all in on their big gun, the N-1. The Soviets planned on a similar approach to NASA, namely choosing to launch their crew capsule and lander on one big rocket. That rocket was the colossal N-1, being the third largest rocket ever built. In February 1969, the Soviets launched their answer to the American Saturn V, and within seconds, problems began to mount, snowballing larger and larger. First, the flight computer shut down one engine, then another, and then another, all in an order to maintain symmetrical thrust, but the vibrations caused a leak, all of which culminated into the rocket falling back to the Earth in a massive fireball. But the Soviets tried again, and the second flight went even worse, only barely creeping over the launch tower, with all but one engine shutting down, resulting in the massive rocket falling back to the pad, resulting in an explosion that completely obliterated its launch pad and sending debris over 6 miles away. The Soviets didn't give up, however. They launched the N-1 rocket 2 more times, both of which resulted in the same fiery end. As a result, in 1974, the Soviets decided to pull the plug on the only rocket capable of sending Soyuz to the moon. But the Soviets didn't give up on Soyuz. It continues to fly to this day on the same rocket it always has, an R-7 derivative. So, that was a long-winded look back at what's left from the space age of the 1960s and 70s. But was Don right? Did he lie when he said the technology was destroyed? No, he didn't lie. The deception is how skeptics and moon landing deniers take this quote out of context and argue it means more than it actually does. Hardware still exists, be it spares, flown articles, or just preserved parts that are on display for all to see. But much of what enabled it to be possible has been destroyed. Don even said it would be a painful process to build up again. For context, when he said,
It's a painful process to build it back again.
It was 2016. Congress only allowed NASA to begin work on a new moon rocket in 2011, so by 2016, this is what our return to the moon looked like. 1 orbital test flight and a few fuel tanks for SLS. But it's been 10 years since he said that. Let's see how much progress NASA has made since then.
4, 3, 2, 1.
stage engines start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
Well, it's been 10 years, but we finally have rebuilt the technology. We have built a new way to reach the moon, and this time at a scale and in a way wholly new and superior to what we achieved with Apollo in the 1960s and 70s. So to wrap up, according to Don Pettit in 2016, we destroyed the technology to go to the moon. Was this true? Yes, but not in the way moon landing skeptics imply or suggest. While much of the physical hardware was scrapped or destroyed to make way for new programs like the Space Shuttle, SpaceX, or NASA's new SLS rocket, much more hardware remains in museums or space centers. What wasn't lost is the knowledge and experience on how to get to the moon. We just had to spend nearly 15 long, painful years building it all back up again, just as Don Pettit said we would have to. Now in 2026, we stand closer than ever before in achieving our return to the moon for the first time in nearly 60 years. And in this approach, the moon isn't our end goal like it was with Apollo, but instead it's just a proving ground for greater destinations and beyond, something even Don Pettit spoke about in 2016, though skeptics never show it.
Destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. But going to Mars should be one of the next series of steps that humans do. The first step should be going back to the moon for a number of technical reasons and exploration reasons, and then after that, Mars, maybe high orbit in Venus atmosphere, maybe going to Europa. There's all kinds of targets to go to, places of interest in our solar system. The only limit to human future is in our own imagination.
So we yet again find that skeptics cling to an argument stemming from ignorance, and worse yet, one that's 10 years out of date, when SpaceX was seen as a new player in spaceflight, and not the world's most dominant launch company as it is today. Back when rockets landing on barges was risky and new, and back when America's ride to the space station was the Russians. Despite that long time span, this conspiracy will likely continue to be spread for many more years to come. And every time it is, you can know the one spreading it either has no clue what they're talking about or is intentionally lying to you.